Alice was sitting by her sister, feeling bored and restless. Suddenly, a white rabbit with pink eyes ran by. He checked his pocket watch and mumbled, oh dear, I shall be late." Full of curiosity, Alice chased after it and suddenly tumbled down a deep rabbit hole. As she fell slowly, she passed cupboards, bookshelves, and maps, wondering where she was headed. She landed in a strange hall surrounded by locked doors. Exploring the hall, she found a tiny golden key, but it only opened a very small door. Peeking through, she saw the most beautiful garden. She was too big to enter. On a glass table, Alice spotted a bottle labeled "Drink Me." She took a careful sip and, to her amazement, began to shrink. She exclaimed, "I must be shutting up like a telescope." To her surprise, she began to shrink, getting smaller and smaller with each sip. Excited, she hurried to the little door that led to the beautiful garden, but she realized she had left the golden key on the table and couldn't reach it. Frustrated, she began to cry, her tears pooling all around her. As she wept, Alice spotted the white rabbit rushing by, complaining about being late. She tried to call out to him, but he didn't stop and quickly vanished, leaving his gloves and fan behind. Curious, Alice picked up the fan and started airing herself. To her surprise, she began to grow taller, stretching up until her head hit the ceiling. Feeling overwhelmed, she cried even more, creating a large pool of tears. After some time, she noticed a mouse swimming nearby and decided to reach out for help. Nervous yet hopeful, Alice called to the mouse, eager to find a way out of this strange situation. Alice swam out through the pool of tears. Suddenly, she saw herself surrounded by the mouse and a dodo. They were soaking wet, standing on dry land. The dodo suggested, "The best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race." Without any clear rules, the race began with everyone running around in circles, stopping whenever they liked. Eventually, the dodo declared, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." Alice was told to give out prizes from her pocket, but all she found was some candies. After the race, the mouse started telling Alice a long and winding story about his dislike for cats and dogs. Alice, misunderstanding the seriousness of the tale, found it amusing and politely interrupted, asking, "I beg your pardon?" Her innocent attempt to cheer the mouse only made him feel more offended, and in frustration, he swam away. The group then dispersed, leaving Alice alone, and once again unsure what to do next. She began to feel lonely. Just then, she spotted the white rabbit rushing again, looking for his gloves and fan, muttering, oh dear, I shall be too late." The rabbit passed Alice. He mistook her for his maid. He ordered her, "Marianne, fetch me my gloves this instant." Startled, Alice followed his command and hurried to his house. Inside, she found a bottle labeled "Drink Me." Once again, she took a sip. To her shock, she started to grow rapidly, filling the room until her arms and legs stuck out of the windows and doors. The rabbit returned, horrified to see his house overtaken by a giant Alice. The rabbit called for help, and soon a group of animals gathered outside, debating how to deal with the situation. They then decided to send Bill the lizard down the chimney, but when Bill tried to enter, Alice gave a little kick, sending him flying out of the chimney. The animals, now panicking, began throwing pebbles at Alice, which to her surprise transformed into little cakes. "If it makes me smaller, I can get out of here," Alice thought. She ate one of the cakes and quickly began to shrink, escaping the rabbit's house. Alice wandered through the forest until she came across a large mushroom. Sitting atop it was a caterpillar lazily smoking a shisha. The caterpillar looked at Alice for some time before finally speaking. "Who are you?" Alice, feeling uncertain, replied, "I hardly know, sir. I knew who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then. The caterpillar remained calm. He asked her again, "What size do you want to be?" Alice explained her confusion about constantly growing and shrinking, to which the caterpillar advised, "One side will make you grow taller. The other side will make you grow shorter." Confused, Alice asked, "One side of what?" The caterpillar replied, "Of the mushroom." Then without another word he crawled away. Taking his advice, Alice broke off 2 pieces of the mushroom, one from each side. After a few experiments, she managed to get herself back to her usual height and set off in search of the beautiful garden she had glimpsed earlier. Alice continued her journey and soon arrived at a house that looked like it was built for a pig. She knocked on the door and a cook opened it. The cook was covered in pepper and throwing dishes all around. Inside the house, she found the Duchess nursing a baby. Alice asked the Duchess, "Why is the baby crying?" The Duchess simply laughed and replied, "Pig!" Perplexed, Alice looked at the baby more closely and realized it was turning into a pig. The Duchess then tossed the baby out of the window, saying, "It will be happier as a pig." Feeling bewildered, Alice left the house and wandered through a garden where she encountered the Cheshire Cat perched up on a branch. The cat wore a wide grin and told Alice, "We're all mad here. I am mad. You are mad." When Alice asked for directions, the cat replied, "It doesn't matter which way you go, as long as you know where you want to get to." After a brief and whimsical conversation, the cat faded away, leaving only its smile behind. Alice continued her journey and soon found herself at a peculiar tea party. There was a March Hare, a Hatter, and a Dormouse, all engaged in a nonsensical conversation. Alice approached and asked if she could join them. The Hatter greeted her with, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" When Alice admitted she didn't know, the Hatter with a mischievous grin replied, "I haven't the slightest idea." The tea party was chaotic, with constant interruptions and illogical conversations. The March Hare insisted it was always tea time, so they never had to clean up. Alice asked about the reasoning behind their odd behavior, but they simply dismissed her questions with absurd answers. At one point, the Hatter asked Alice, "What's the time?" When she replied it was 6 o'clock, he exclaimed, "It's time to get up." The Hatter then claimed that it was never the right time, as he was stuck at tea forever. Amid the madness, the Dormouse told a strange story about 3 sisters who lived in a well, only to fall asleep and forget their names. Frustrated with their silliness, Alice finally stood up and declared she had enough. She left the tea party, feeling bewildered but amused by the nonsensical encounter. Alice then arrived at the Queen of Hearts croquet ground, where she found an unusual scene. The Queen was overseeing a chaotic game of croquet played with flamingos as mallets and hedgehogs as balls. The participants included the King of Hearts and various cards, all of whom seemed more interested in avoiding the Queen's anger than playing the game. Alice soon encountered the cat again, who pointed out that everyone was mad, including the Queen. He explained, "In this country, it doesn't matter who you are. It only matters who you want to be." The Queen frequently shouted, "Off with their heads," at anyone who annoyed her. She created an atmosphere of fear and confusion among the players. Despite the chaos, Alice tried to participate in the game, but quickly grew frustrated by the lack of logic and fairness. As the game continued, the Queen became increasingly demanding and unpredictable. Alice observed the ridiculousness of the scene, feeling a mixture of amusement and annoyance at the Queen's tyrannical attitude. She left the game midway and continued walking through the Wonderland. Alice wandered into a strange field where she met the Mock Turtle, who greeted her with a sense of melancholy. "What is a Mock Turtle?" asked Alice. "I'm a little bit like a turtle and a little bit like a mock," he replied. The Mock Turtle shared stories about his school experiences, reminiscing about bizarre subjects they studied. "We had to learn ambition and distraction. I never understood any of them." Just then, the Griffin appeared and encouraged the Mock Turtle to tell Alice about his dance. "Come on, tell her how you danced." Excited, the Mock Turtle explained the lobster quadrille. "We would dance on the beach with lobsters," he exclaimed. "We would sing, 'Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, join the dance?'" Alice, feeling amused and bewildered, asked, "Is it really as odd as it sounds?" The Mock Turtle insisted, "It's the most delightful dance. You must try it." As they engaged in more whimsical antics, the Griffin suggested a mock trial, saying playfully, "Let's make you the judge, Alice." The Mock Turtle then sang a sorrowful song about a beau expressing his lost love. "He was my darling," he lamented. Alice listened intently, appreciating the beauty in their strange stories. Alice felt a mix of amusement and confusion at this point of time. The Griffin, eager to continue their adventure, reminded Alice of the unfolding events in Wonderland. "You know, the Knave of Hearts is on trial for stealing the Queen's tarts," he announced. Intrigued, Alice expressed her desire to see the trial, and the Griffin led her to the courtroom. The King of Hearts, meekly trying to maintain order, suggested, "Let the trial begin." Alice, still feeling empowered from her earlier defiance, decided to stay and witness the trial. She felt it was utterly ridiculous. The courtroom was chaotic. The Queen presided over the proceedings, had her temper flaring at the slightest provocation. The Queen called for the first witness, the Mad Hatter, who spoke in his usual nonsensical manner. "I wish I had a rabbit in my hat," he declared, earning a glare from the Queen. The Queen, impatient and demanding, shouted, "Enough of this nonsense. We want to know about the tarts." The knave stood nervously as the Queen shouted, "Off with his head!" The King attempted to calm her down, saying, "Let's hear the evidence first." Alice, increasingly frustrated by the absurdity of the trial, finally spoke up. "You can't go around shouting 'off with their heads' without any proof." The Queen turned furious and asked her, "Who are you?" Alice boldly replied, "I am Alice, and I have had enough of this nonsense. You can't execute someone without a fair trial." The Queen, momentarily taken aback by Alice's boldness, shouted, "Off with her head!" But Alice stood firm, declaring, "You're nothing but a pack of cards." In that moment, the entire courtroom erupted in chaos. The cards began to flutter about, and Alice found herself surrounded by a whirlwind of cards, all screaming and shouting. As the madness escalated, Alice suddenly felt herself growing larger, realizing that she was regaining her true size. In that moment, everything around her began to blur and fade. The cards and characters in the courtroom swirled into a chaotic whirlwind, and Alice felt a sudden jolt as she awakened. She discovered that she was lying on the riverbank, back in the real world, next to her sister. Realizing that her adventures in Wonderland were merely a dream, Alice shared her incredible experiences with her sister. Her sister listened with fascination, contemplating the whimsical world Alice described. As the sister reflected on her stories, she imagined her own adventures in Wonderland.